Welcome to Murder Mile, a true crime podcast, an audio-guided walk featuring many of London's untold, unsolved and long-forgotten murders, all set within London's West End. Today's episode is about Emily Beilby Kaye, a sweet-natured lady who eloped with a lovable Irish rogue called Pat. Only Pat wasn't what he seemed, and with Emily missing, very little evidence, and her body destroyed, although her death looked accidental, the police now had to prove that this was a murder. Murder Mile is researched using the original police files. It contains moments of satire, shock and grisly details, and as a dramatization of the real events, it may also feature loud and realistic sounds, so that, no matter where you listen to this podcast, you'll feel like you're actually there. My name is Michael, I am your tour guide, and this is Murder Mile. Episode 75, The Fatal Fling of Emily Beilby Kaye, Part 2, The Liar. Today, I'm standing in Waterloo train station, just off the south bank of the River Thames. 3 bridges southwest of the hanging of Roberto Calvi, 2 streets west of the brutal attack on David Morley, and 1 street south of the revenge attack on Sir Michael Francis O'Dwyer. Coming soon to Murder Mile. Built in 1848, London Waterloo is the UK's busiest train station, serving over 100 million customers a year from the south of England and terminating at the West End. With a Baroque Portland stone entrance, stained glass windows, ornate friezes, and its infamous 4-faced clock, Waterloo's 700-foot concourse is naturally illuminated by an expansive glass roof and cast-iron arches. Sadly, most of its stunning architecture is lost amidst a nauseating sea of colourful adverts for caffeine-rich cow tit drinks, a splat of mashed pig corpses in a ketchup bun, macerated baby chickens moulded into fun-sized fat-coated nuggets, the latest bum-numbing series you simply must see or your life isn't worth living, which apparently gets good around Series 3, and ironically, adverts for health insurance. Waterloo Station is like a little shopping complex, but back in its heyday, it was pretty much the same. A train station full of tea shops, florists, newsstands, and even a cinema. And yet, as many punters watched the latest newsreels, cartoons and thrillers, barely a few feet away, in the left luggage kiosk on the south side of Waterloo Station, a bloody murder mystery was unfolding. As it was here, on Friday the 2nd of May 1924, 17 days after her disappearance, that the murderer of Emily Beilby Kaye would be caught. All the police had to do now was to prove it. By the morning of Friday the 2nd of May, the police knew that the brown Gladstone bag belonged to Jesse's adulterous husband Pat, the torn clothes to his mistress Emily, the cook's knife tested positive for blood, and the yellowy brown fat proved to be human. And although they suspected that something more sinister had happened, Chief Inspector Guy Savage had only circumstantial evidence of an illicit affair or a botched abortion, but nothing more. But having stashed the Gladstone bag in the left luggage kiosk at Waterloo Station and kept the ticket, believing that he might return to collect it, the police placed the bag back on the shelf, instructed his long-suffering wife Jessie to return the ticket to the pocket of his brown crumpled suit where she had first found it, and with CID officers lying in wait, a trap had been set to catch a killer. But who was Pat? And why would he kill the woman he loved? Patrick Mahon was born on the 23rd of September 1889 on Helena Street in West Derby, Liverpool. The fourth of 6 children to Henry, a wholesale draper, and Amy, a housewife. With all of his siblings entering honest professions. One was a veterinary surgeon, one was a teacher, and one was a priest. Raised in a middle-class household, in an affluent suburb, in a prosperous booming city, with the Mahon family being big believers in hard work, decency, and the teachings of the good book. As dedicated churchgoers, they were widely regarded as respectable, moral, and honest. Just like Emily, Pat had a good upbringing and was given everything he would need to become a fine, upstanding man. But unlike Emily, his life wasn't beset by tragedy, struggle, or grief. Educated at St Mary's Church of England School, although he was good at sports, active in the church, and would later become a Sunday school teacher, being described as bright but easily distracted, Pat grappled with his religious beliefs. As if sins were so bad, why did breaking them feel so good? On the surface, Pat seemed like a handsome charmer, but being easily tempted by the devilish lure of goods, girls, and gambling, and excited by the thrill of defying God. Seeing these sins not as life lessons, but as goals to getting whatever he desired, Pat had learned to lie, cheat, and steal. After a few weeks as a shop assistant for H. Young & Sons, Pat was dismissed, having been suspected of theft. His next job, as a clerk for a chocolatiers called Barker & Dobson, lasted a few months. But having developed an insatiable addiction to betting on horse races, it was no coincidence that after he left, the company's finances were no longer a little bit light. Here he also stole the heart of a 23-year-old typist called Jessie, a good Catholic girl with a solid work ethic and a romantic soul. But with Pat being incapable of ever telling the truth, while still living under the roofs of their respective parents, at Pat's request, they married in secret. And as his addiction got worse, so did the deceit. On the 24th of January 1911, after a few months working as a clerk for W.G. Taylor's, an African art importer, Pat was arrested for forging cheques worth £123, almost £6,000 today, all under the aliases he used to cover up his crimes, including Herbert Mahon, Pat Waller, and Pat Derrick Pattinson. Too cowardly to face the police, Pat fled, left Jessie to pick up the pieces, and with Mr. Taylor unwilling to prosecute Pat out of respect for his family, Pat's father paid the balance of the missing monies, and after 1 month on the run, Patrick Mahon was bound over for 1 year at Liverpool City Police Court. As a convicted criminal, Pat's dirty little secret was hushed up by his family, and having discovered that he was secretly married, his mother insisted they remarry. But the sanctity of marriage meant nothing to Pat, as all the while he posed as a single man, using his ill-gotten gains to woo his other women. His parents and his long-suffering wife had put up with so much. They had given him so many chances. But that year, unable to see beyond his greed, Patrick Mahon took one step closer to becoming a killer. On the night of Saturday the 8th of April 1916, seeing theft as easier than earning an honest wage, Pat broke into the unlit home of Herman Lang, manager of the London and Provincial Bank in Chertsey. Dressed in black, and clutching a hammer he had wrapped in cloth to deaden the sound, Pat shimmied up a drain pipe, cracked a hole in the first floor window, lifted a latch, and crept in. His plan was perfect. Except, having startled the sleeping housemaid, as she screamed and turned to flee, Pat panicked, hit her several times over the head with a hammer, rendering her unconscious and profusely bleeding. Only Pat didn't run. Instead, he waited. As with no signs of the police, the house secluded, the maid still alive, and his greed overpowering any rational thought, when she came to, he demanded she hand him the keys to the bank. But when he returned later the next day, with the police lying in wait, Pat was arrested. On the 27th of June 1916, Patrick Mahon was sentenced to 5 years hard labour for burglary and the assault on Olive Whitkins. And although his actions had severe ramifications for others, he showed no regrets for his victim, his family, his baby daughter, or his wife. Upon his conviction, his siblings disowned him, his mother sank into depression, and his father, it is said, died of shame. After 4 years in prison, Pat moved to No. 2 Pagoda Avenue in Kew to live with the only person who stuck by him, his long-suffering wife Jessie. Struggling to find work, to help her out, Jessie's employer, Consols Automatic Aerators Limited, hired Pat as a sales manager to oversee the company's liquidation under Robertson Hill & Co. And it is there, in July 1923, that he would meet Emily Beilby Kaye. From the first day they met to her very last day alive, Pat lied to Emily. Lured by his chiseled good looks, dazzled by his roguish charm, and amused by his cheeky banter, the smitten spinster knew him not as Pat Mahon, but as Patrick Derrick Pattinson, a pseudonym he used to sign false checks, to hide his philandering ways, and to mask his criminal convictions. By September, after a delightful day by the river, their first intimacy took place. It meant everything to Emily, as the respectable lady gave up her body to the man she loved. But to a serial womanizer like Pat, she was just another notch on the bedpost. And as the desperately lovesick lady droned on and on about marriage, to keep her sweet, he told her his divorce was imminent. But in truth, it wasn't. By Christmas, with Emily no longer employed at Robertson Hill & Co., they saw each other less and less. Which was fine by Pat, as growing ever needy, Emily's talk of romance had become tiresome. Besides, he had been married before, and it was all a bit of a bore. Babies did nothing but wither his wild oats. And why would he divorce his wife, when Jessie was the one he always ran to when everything went wrong? It was fun while it lasted, but the affair was over. Pat didn't love Emily, but he did love her money. Blinded by his charm, the level-headed lady was strung along by the well-rehearsed spiel of a cash-strapped Lothario, as the convicted fraudster coerced the usually frugal Emily to sell £400 worth of her shares, under the ruse that they would start a new life together in South Africa via Paris. On the 27th of March 1924, as a weakened Emily recuperated from a suspected flu, her alleged lover trotted out the tried and tested ploy of chilled champagne, twinkling stars, and a sparkly ring. And having got down on bended knee, Pat proposed, and Emily's dream came true. But to Pat, a ring was just a ring, a pretty thing to pop on a finger. So having kept the receipt, he knew he would lose nothing. Only Emily wasn't easily duped, as being a self-sufficient woman whose calmness had guided her through years of family tragedy, with Pat still not divorced and still without a passport, now more than ever being 2 months pregnant and rightfully suspicious that he was cheating on her with another woman, she needed to test his commitment by making them live as husband and wife. At her request, Pat rented a romantic little cottage called the Officer's House in Pevensey Bay. It was perfect. For Emily, it meant long coastal walks and quiet nights by the fire. But for Pat, who viewed it under an alias, paid in cash, and rented it for 6 weeks longer than he needed, having lied to the owners that his wife needed a quiet place to write, it was isolated, remote, and private. And having told her lover about the impending birth of their baby, with that, her fate was sealed. On Saturday the 12th of April at 1 p.m, as Emily checked out of the Kenilworth Court Hotel, dragging behind her a large trunk which would soon contain the hacked-up bits of her dismembered corpse, a salesman at the Staines Kitchen Equipment Company made an entry in his logbook for a 10-inch cook's knife and a small meat saw. The buyer was Pat Mahon, and it was dated 3 days before her death. On the 13th, they walked arm in arm on the shingle beach. On the 14th, Emily posted a letter to Fizz, and on the 15th, she waved to a passing butcher. After that, she was never seen alive again. The night of Tuesday the 15th of April was nasty, as a violent storm ripped through the heart of Pevensey Bay. In the bungalow, sat alone by a flickering firelight, Emily ate the roast dinner, as once again, opposite hers, Pat's plate remained untouched. His commitment to their relationship was as tested as her patience, as of the 3 days they had lived together, Pat had been gone for 2. In a statement, Pat later claimed,
"She fumed and raved. Suddenly, in a fit of anger, she picked up a coal axe."
Only we know that's not true, as being described as one of the nicest girls you could ever hope to meet, who was placid, sweet-natured, and unflappable, Emily was never violent.
"She threw it at me. It glanced off my shoulder."
But when Pat was examined by a doctor, he had no cuts or bruises to any part of his body.
"It hit the bedroom door, breaking the shaft."
And although the police found a small hand axe with its handle split, tests confirmed it had been splintered by repetitive hard strikes, not a single blow, and on none of the doors was there an axe wound.
I felt appalled at the fury she'd shown me, and realised how strong she was.
Given her physical fitness, his lack of injuries, and being a woman who could handle herself, the police believe she didn't die in a fight as he had suggested, but in a cowardly brutal attack from behind.
We struggled, fell over an easy chair, and her head came into violent contact with a round coal cauldron.
And although a leg on the cast iron cauldron was bent, the housekeeper confirmed that this had happened 1 year prior.
She lay stunned or dead. The next few seconds I can't remember, except as a nightmare of horror as I saw blood begin to issue from Miss Kaye's head. I did my utmost to revive her.
Only he didn't. Pat's statement was a tissue of lies. And yet, the evidence told a different story. Having earlier stocked the cauldron full of coal and spent a short while chopping logs, Pat hid the axe in the bedroom. Seeing the notorious womanizer stumble home late, Emily calmly put an end to the relationship, and dressed in slippers, bloomers and a silk nightdress, she walked out of the bedroom to sleep somewhere else. For Pat, who wanted out of the relationship, she had handed it to him on a plate. It was fun while it lasted, but the affair was over. Besides, Pat didn't love Emily, but he did love her money. And with the bungalow secluded, the axe in his fist, and Emily's back turned, as his greed overpowered any rational thought, just as he had with the banker's housemaid, Olive Witkins. Seeing her not as a human being, but as an obstacle to his money. With a single fast blow, Pat buried the axe in Emily's head. Caught off guard, as an intense pain shot into her brain, Emily staggered into the sitting room, dazed and blinded, her last steps marked by a bloody trickle. Only being physically strong, she didn't fall. So having learned from his attack on Olive, who had survived having been repeatedly beaten over the head with a hammer, Pat wasn't going to make the same mistake with Emily. And having bludgeoned her skull so the bone caved in and the axe broke, Pat strangled Emily until her legs stopped twitching. When questioned by the police, Pat perfectly played the part of a grieving lover whose fiancée had died in a tragic accident. Only his tears weren't real, and his delay in her dismemberment had nothing to do with grief. 5 days prior, on Thursday the 10th of April, whilst waiting at Richmond train station, 32-year-old Ethel Primrose Duncan met a handsome Irish rogue, who, although he had a wife at home and a pregnant mistress in a hotel, he claimed to be an unhappily married and impending divorcee called Pat Waller. On Tuesday the 15th of April, as Emily cooked a romantic roast dinner for two, Pat dined with Ethel. Returning late to their love nest, with perfume on his suit, lipstick on his cheek, and cheap whiskey on his breath, for Emily, this was the last straw. And yet, before she was even dead, Pat had already invited his new mistress to spend the following weekend with him in the secluded cottage in Pevensey Bay. All he needed was Emily out of the way. On Thursday the 17th of April, Pat sent Ethel a telegram and a £4 money order to get a train ticket to Eastbourne. Anticipating a sexy weekend, to set a more romantic mood, he scrubbed the bloodied carpet, shoved Emily's stuff in a box, and as she was too big to dump in the trunk, he decapitated her cold corpse, as his butcher's meat saw ripped through skin, muscle and bone, severing her spine and splitting her body into 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso and a head. Ethel stayed at the bungalow from Friday to Sunday, sleeping in a dead woman's bed, spending a dead woman's money, shagging a dead woman's killer, and all just a few feet from the mangled stinking mess of his mistress's rotting flesh. Thankfully, Ethel had a really bad cold, so she smelt nothing. With the weekend's fun done, over the next 10 days, Pat disposed of the body of Emily Beilby Kaye. As a broad girl, even with her limbs sawn in half and her torso split into quarters, her bits were still too big to bin. So in the skull of his bath, using the 10-inch cook's knife, Pat sliced off her sagging muscles, the jagged blade tearing at her rancid meat, as a thick gloop of congealed blood, cartilage and sinew splashed up the cast iron bath and clogged the choking drain pipe. On the stove, 3 2-gallon saucepans boiled hour after hour, as in a red bubbling liquid with a yellowy brown curd on top. Severed arms and hands were boiled down to bones, as the air hung with an unholy mix of old stew, hot fat and singed hair. On the fires, he burnt her feet, neck, bits of spine.
The thigh bone also. It's surprising what a fire will destroy.
And although, at some point, he must have loved her,
I burned her head in the fire. It was finished in about 3 hours.
As he sat and watched his mistress's face char and blacken, until nothing was left but a skull.
I poked it. The fire poker went right through her head.
And to sum up how little his lover meant to him,
The next day, I smashed up the skull and put the pieces in the bin.
by the 28th of April, almost 2 weeks after the murder, Pat still struggled to fully dispose of Emily's body. In the trunk were 2 slabs of pelvis and her right upper chest. In her hat box were 20 wrapped slivers of boiled flesh. And in a Huntley and Palmer's biscuit tin were her lungs, heart, bowels, liver and intestines, all yet to be boiled, burned or binned. And with the bungalow sticky with blood, crawling with flies, and oozing with hot pots of human fat, with close to 1,000 bone fragments in the fire's ash pan, it was an absolute mess. But being due back at work, Pat had to go home. Planning to return, Pat packed his brown Gladstone bag. He wrapped the cook's knife in the bloomers. 20 more slivers of boiled flesh parcelled up in the nightdress and stashed inside the tennis satchel to disguise the smell.
I tossed them out of the train between Eastbourne and Waterloo.
That same day, at the left luggage kiosk in Waterloo Station, having handed in his bag, Pat was given ticket number J2415, which he placed inside the pocket of his crumpled brown suit. And that night, at home, as he kissed his wife and child, Pat grinned with delight, as once again he had defied God. Only with the trap having been set, this would be the last sin of Patrick Mahon. On Friday the 2nd of May 1924, at 8:40 p.m, Pat collected the brown Gladstone bag and was apprehended by PC Mark Thompson. But he wasn't arrested, as at that point the police didn't know if a crime had even been committed. All they had was the bag. Interviewed at Kensington Police Station, Pat remained cool, claiming it was meat for his dogs. But Chief Inspector Guy Savage refused to accept his lies, as after an hour of cunning silence, Pat broke and said,
I suppose you know everything. I'll tell you the truth.
And although his statement was a tissue of lies, the evidence inside the bungalow spoke volumes. According to the Home Office pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the body was destroyed beyond all recognition. But having trawled through saucepans of bloodied gloop, bins of sliced up bits, and even the clogged drain pipe of the bath, he matched the victim's blood group, hair colour, height, weight, sex, age, and month of her pregnancy to the missing woman, having painstakingly recreated her skull from hundreds of bits of bone in the ashes fire. And so even without a body, the police could not only prove that this wasn't an accident, but that this was a murder. On the 8th of July 1924, Patrick Mahon pleaded not guilty and stuck to the story that Emily's death was a tragic accident, having hit her head on the coal scuttle. But faced with overwhelming evidence, and the jury appalled not just by his callous acts, but also by the affair he had engaged in with Ethel Duncan between the day of the death and the dismemberment. Having been found guilty of the murder of Emily Beilby Kaye on Wednesday the 3rd of September 1924, Patrick Mahon was executed at Wandsworth Prison. The liar, cheat, thief and womanizer had almost got away with the perfect murder. Almost. Had it not been for his bag, a ticket, and the suspicions of his wife. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to Murder Mile. That was the concluding part of the fatal fling of Emily Beilby Kaye. And for all of Mickey's bona fide Belgian bun munching pals, there's more sweet treats after the break. But before that, here's my recommended podcasts of the week.
Hey guys, my name is Tara.
And my name is Jessica, and together we co-host the podcast, Three Spooked Girls.
If you love the paranormal
Or murder.
join us every Monday as we tell our listeners about a new spooky tale or true crime case.
We'll have a special drink recipe each episode picked out by me for you to enjoy while we scare the hell out of you.
You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever the hell else you listen to podcasts.
Come hang out with us and get your spooky on.
A huge thank you goes out to my new Patreon supporters, who are Vivia Bow, Georgia Harris, and Diane Lowe. I thank you. With an extra thank you to those patrons who have increased their pledge to get extra goodies, like early ad-free episodes, and even a Murder Mile mug. Ooh. Plus special thank yous to Tom and Nicola Rainsy Hughes for their lovely card and wedding seeds, which I have planted in my Murder Mile plant pot. And a thank you to Emma Thorpe, who I met at the Generation Y They Walk Among Us meetup, for sending me the very lovely email. Murder Mile was researched, written and performed by myself, with the main musical themes written and performed by Eric Stein and John Books of Cult with No Name. Thank you for listening, and sleep well. How long was that? That's not too bad, that. Yeah, that'll be alright. I'd have a stretch. Hello, Murky Milers. How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? How are we all? We all good? I just got to check the time. That's fine. How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? Yeah, I think I was doing a bit of Joe Tribbiani there. Then it morphed into something else. I don't know what that was. Anyway, welcome everyone. Extra Mile. The extra bit after the episode you've just listened to. So that was the hard bit. That was the bit that's really difficult for me to do and takes between 60 to 100 hours a week. And this is the easy bit where I just waffle a bit. And, you know, God, if only this Murder Mile was as easy as doing Extra Mile. Look, it's not even scripted. It's just waffle. It's just me waffling. This mouth is open. It's just things are coming out. And it's like, and this won't even get edited out. This is all just staying in. Oh, if only it was all as easy as that. The first bit is going to take me a bloody long time. It's going to be, that's going to be about 3 days to edit that. 3 whole days. But it'll be worth it. It'll be good. It'll be good. I hope you like the first bit. That was last week. I hope you like this bit. I'm not going to put them together as a kind of as I do with the big multi-part series. I'm not going to bolt them together as a kind of an omnibus edition because it's only a 2-parter. There's no point. I only do that with the big multi-part is when it's, you know, if it's over like more than a month or something like that. I think sometimes you need to. It's nice to have a refresher. So I won't be doing that with this episode because they're a bit close together. That was that. That was a 2-parter. That was the Emily Beilby case story. Hope you enjoyed that. Next week we've got one more Murder Mile episode, and then we go into 6 mini miles, and then we go into the final run before Christmas. You can tell it's getting to Christmas because it's getting bloody cold now. Getting really bloody cold. Really foggy outside this morning. I've got my 2 sheets on my bed, my duvet, and then a kind of furry one on top. And even I woke up this morning and thought, ooh, it's a bit nippy. It's not nippy enough for me to put the fire on though. I'm one of these people. I've got my logs. I've got all my logs there, and I'm picking up my third of a ton of coal next week, and I'm collecting my newspapers and my kindling and doing all that. But I'm one of these people who I like to wait. I wait. There's people now, it's like I've seen people, even on the hottest day of the year, I saw people on their boats with their fires on. Why? Why have you done that? Why have you got your fires on? It was like 34 degrees and people had their fires on. It's like, are you idiots? So already, because it's gone a little bit cold, it's not cold, it's still like 17 degrees or whatever, people are still got their fires on. It's like, why? You won't appreciate it later on. So what I do is I wait until like we're way into December until it really, 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 really starts to get cold, and then I go, right, I wait for the day. My fire's ready. I cleaned it out at the end of the last season, then I stocked it all up so it's ready and it's sitting there. But it won't go on until December, and then I can really appreciate it. Or, as I normally do, I'll switch it on and go, oh, it's too hot. And then I have to open the doors, because I like the cold. I do like the cold. Where was I? What was I doing? So, I'm heading south. I'm heading back into town, which is all nice, which is good. It means I don't have to get the train in from town to go in to do the walks. I can kind of start cycling in now because it's only about 15 miles, so that's good. Just had a nice weekend away. Congratulations to Barbie and Joe. Went to their wedding. Very kind of them to invite me. Had a really lovely time. Lots of boozing, lots of good food, lots of boogieing, some good tunes. We all had a lovely time. So it was a good giggle. Lots of bullshit spoken by Uncle Roy. Say no more. Oh, what a character. And while I was there, this was a wedding in Rye on the south coast, or near the south coast. I was going to record a meander mile there, and I'd scripted it and done all that, and I got my microphone, but when I got there I thought, let's not. What I've decided to do with the meander miles, because I've done, what did I do? I did Covent Garden, I've done Old Compton Street. I've decided to keep them local, so it'll all be places that you're aware of. So I'm probably going to do one in Chinatown. I'm probably going to do one in Piccadilly Circus. Do you know? So at least it's places that you're familiar with, that we've been to before. We can reference old stories that we've been to, but hopefully there'll be lots of new stuff as well. So that's what's going to happen with Meander Mile. Exciting news at the moment. Even though I sound quite up and chipper, it's weird that I'm up and chipper and full of beans and energy, because, went to the wedding this weekend. I've got my suit. I have a suit. Well, I have a funeral suit, and then I have a non-funeral suit. That's really all I've got. Funeral suit's there. Non-funeral suit, my brown one, a brown suit. It's a nice suit. I like it. I wore it to my brother's wedding about 5 years ago. It was far. The suit was good. It fitted nicely. It was not too tight. So immediately afterwards, I dry cleaned it, put it back in the cupboard. Because we were coming up to Barbie and Joe's wedding, I pulled it out. I was like, oh, it's still dry cleaned. I was like, fantastic. I forgot that I dry cleaned it. Great. So it's done. So I took out the shirt, tried on the shirt. Shirt still fitted. I was like, great, that's perfect. The problem was, went to the wedding, did the night before. We all had a good film. We all got very, very, very drunk. Very, very drunk. We won't really talk about that anymore. Got very drunk. I didn't get as drunk as everyone else. I was on best behaviour. But the next day, getting ready for the wedding, about an hour before the wedding, I thought, well, I'll put my suit on, and then we'll, just at a shower, we'll go out and go to the town hall. Popped on my shirt. That was all fine. Went to pop on the trousers. Couldn't do them up. Couldn't close the buckle of the trousers. So I was like, right, shit. Well, luckily I've got a belt with me, so I'll put the belt on and I'll safety pin myself in to the trousers, so at least they won't pop open. But I was kind of all night. I was kind of double checking myself because the zip wouldn't go all the way up. I kind of had to safety pin that in as well, so I had to be really careful. And then I thought, right, that's fine. Then I went to put on the jacket, and it was like that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark when Indiana Jones, he's inside the Nazi submarine base, and he beats up a Nazi to steal his uniform, and then he goes to put on the Nazi's uniform, and he realizes the Nazi is about 5 foot, about a foot shorter than he is, and it doesn't fit. And when he's trying to put it over the shirt over his chest, and it's like about 2 inches too short. That was me with my jacket. I couldn't put the jacket on. So all of the cake that I've been eating, all the chocolate, all the biscuits, I've bulked up. I've got fat. So I'm on a strict no junky foodie diet at the moment. Even though I don't eat a lot of junk food, I do like my cake, as you know. Do like cake, do like biscuits. And, if you add it all up, I probably get through like a big cake every day and probably I could easily get through a whole pack of things. That's the problem. So, until Christmas, no cakes, no chocolates, no biscuits. Not even going to have Diet Coke because it's not good for you, and it gives it. I've had a couple of days off that, so the aspartame and headaches have gone. Thank God. If you're there now and you're going, I don't get headaches from Diet Coke, try going off it for a while. If you have it once in a blue moon, it's not a problem. But if you have it repeatedly and you've never gone off it, try going off it for a couple of days, and then you'll realise it's bad stuff. It really is. I even tried moving on to Fanta or 7-Up, but then I found out Fanta and 7-Up is basically Coke, just with different colouring, really. So it's got the same shit in it. So, yeah, on a completely different diet, which means I'm going to go and make a cup of tea, but it's not. It won't be a cup of tea as we normally know it, because I'm trying to cut down on all the water that goes in. Not all the water. Water's fine. What am I talking about? I'm trying to cut down all the sugar that goes in it and things like that. I won't be having my usual tea today. I'm onto my green teas. Yeah. Because like I have like five, 6, maybe sometimes 10 cups of tea a day. And if you think about it, I have 2 spoons of sugar in there. That adds up to, it's between 10 to 20 spoons of sugar a day, which is a lot. It all adds up. So, trying to do that. And obviously it's got milk in it as well. Powdered milk, but there we go. Right, so I want a strict one. It's going well so far. I'm feeling good. What's today? What's today? Wednesday. So this will be day 3. It's fine. I did this before. I had a couple of months of not eating crap, and I felt really good. You do feel really good when you're not on a diet. When you're on a diet, when you eat, I realise that when you're eating crap, you just feel sluggish and awful. Your body can't kind of process stuff, and you just feel bad. But when in the evenings, I have fish, rice, vegetables. That's pretty much it. And do you know what? You feel good afterwards. And I only pooing once a day. Yeah, you need to know that, didn't you? Right. So let's add in some bits about this story that I may have not told you last time. Really annoyingly, I when I was writing episode 1 and then I moved info across to episode 2, I moved info I was going to use for the next episode onto page 2, and then I deleted some of it that was on page 1, which was the interesting stuff that I didn't tell you last week, which I'll never be able to tell you again because I've just deleted it, which is really annoying. So there was a scene that I removed, a small scene that I removed earlier in this episode, just because I felt it kind of threw us off. But what it was that aged 18, when Pat was still living at home with his parents came in and found him in his bedroom. He was unconscious, having been inhaling chloroform. He was taken to hospital. He recovered. They were unsure at that point whether this was a suicide attempt, which was odd because they said he hadn't been depressed at all, or whether he'd been experimenting with drugs, or because he was constantly trying to push the boundaries of kind of God's sins, theft and adultery, and eventually it would be murder, whether this was another one that he was trying to push. So still to this day, no one knows why he was inhaling chloroform and took himself so close to death, but that was in there. I ended up taking it out of the script in the end because I just didn't. It kind of threw things off, but I think it's interesting. I think it says a lot about his mental instability. I originally put it in there because the family helped cover it up. They were like, because it's a bit of 1920s, suicide, not only was it illegal, but regarded highly as a sin and quite shameful. So his family, that was one of the first moments when they covered up what he'd been doing. Obviously later on it was with his further crimes. Obviously, so I've told you this story. I've told you the 2 versions of the story. I told you Emily's story. This is pretty much his story, so it's kind of more balanced his way, and kind of I've told it mostly from his perspective, so it can be a bit derogatory against Emily on there. But as you know, they kind of met up together. She had money, he didn't have money. She was quite frugal with her money. She'd got her inheritance, which she'd invested. She had 30 Mahon brewery shares, and she also invested in Dunlop as well. So 2 good companies. So I'm listening out for the kettle for my green tea. Ooh. Yes. I'm saying a lot. So on the 16th of February 1924, so this is obviously after he was like, the relationship's over, it's a bit shit, but I do kind of like her money. So that's what, when he's stuck with her. Tea's up. Yeah. Which one's this? Is this lemon green tea? Lemon green tea. There we go. Tea's up. No biscuit. I have got an apple next to me, but there's no biscuit. 16th of February 1924, Emily wrote a cheque for £404, which is roughly her shares. She had 600 shares, which was about £35,000 today, roughly. So that would be about £20,000 if my maths is right. Emily wrote a cheque for £404,000 from the Midland Bank in Coleman Street. The bank gave her 4 £100 notes, obviously with 4 extra pound notes as well. 3 returned to the bank and 1 is still in circulation. The 3 cash notes, because obviously £100 notes. I mean, today I've never seen a £100 note, but then that would have been huge. The first was cashed in by a man on the 19th of February 1924. It was signed by a man named A. Lowe of Fairley in Sheffield. Now, Pat had connections, even though he's not using the name of his usual names here. He had connections to Sheffield. The second £100 note was cashed on the 24th of March 1924. Interestingly, that's just around the time that he was buying the engagement ring, by a man signed as J. Edge of St. Elms in Staines. He also had connections to Staines. And the third £100 was on the 17th of April 1924, signed by J.B. Peters of 27 Hagley Road in Birmingham, my old neck of the woods. Now, Hagley Road, I took this out of the story, I might have taken it, I might have left it in, I can't remember. Hagley Road was when he was first arrested for forging cheques, and then he ran away. He fled for about a month, leaving Jessie and his newborn baby to kind of fend for themselves. He disappeared for a month and he was arrested in Hagley Road in Birmingham. So it's another one of these places that Pat seemed to know quite well. And when they got back the counter-signatures on... Because obviously when the £100 notes were cashed in the bank, obviously the bank has to get a signature. And the handwriting on it, all of the handwriting matched Patrick Mahon's. Ooh. He said he did this, this was after he was arrested, because he said he did this as they were speculating in French francs. Now, as we know, they said that they were going to go to France afterwards. They're going to go to Paris before they went off to South Africa, which obviously never happened. When in all of Emily's belongings, they didn't find any money, but when they on Pat, when they searched his possessions, he had about 1,800 French francs on him. So he had cashed those, but the police believe that this is part of a fabrication. So he'd actually cashed some French francs so he could show to Emily and go, look, we've got French francs. We are going to go to Paris. But he hadn't got his passport. It's also, I couldn't actually prove it on here, but... he was still under license, having been released from prison, because obviously it was quite a serious offence. You know, it was burglary, and it was a grievous bodily harm. I put assault on there, but it was actually grievous bodily harm. So he hadn't got a passport, and the likelihood is he couldn't get a passport, and he couldn't leave the country. This was said in one of the statements, but I couldn't prove it, so I actually didn't put it in the story. End of March, obviously we know. Slightly confusing issues on here. It says at the end of March that Emily got ill with influenza. It wasn't influenza, it was kind of a flu. She went to Bournemouth to recuperate first. Then Pat travelled down to see her at the end of her stay, and they shared a double room at the Southwestern Hotel in Southampton. So they moved to Southampton, and then she moved to Eastbourne. But obviously we know around that point that she was ill with the flu, but actually she was pregnant. She went to the sea to rejuvenate. From the 25th of March 1924 to the 1st of April 1924, they stayed at the Regina Court Hotel in Eastcliff, Bournemouth, except on the 27th when she met Pat in Southampton, and they stayed at the Southwestern Hotel. 27th of March, he purchased her a sapphire ring at W. Cranbrook on the High Street in Southampton, which was a jeweller's. It was a sapphire ring with a small gold shank, a set sapphire in the centre, which was surrounded by diamonds. Very nice. Oddly, at the end of this, whether he was being just a bit messy with the dismemberment and things like that, but even though he still got the receipt for the ring was found amongst the ash in the house. So he'd actually burnt the body, or as we were saying, he was boiling down the hands and to get rid of them, and then trying to burn the rest of it on the fire, burn the bones. But the ring was found in there, so he didn't actually take the ring back. Maybe he just didn't think about it, or maybe the place was just a mess. He couldn't see it. Maybe that's it. Maybe if the hands were absolutely caked in blood, maybe he just didn't see the ring anymore, or maybe it just slipped off. Who knows? So, unfortunately, the location of the murder, the officers' quarters in Pevensey Bay, also known as the Langley Bungalows, is between Eastbourne and Bexhill. It was a row of whitewashed cottages formerly occupied by coastguards. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. It was owned by Mrs. K.S. Hutchinson of 67 Princes Gate, SW7, which is, I think that's Fulham, I believe, SW7. It had 4 bedrooms, 2 sitting rooms, a kitchen, a scullery, a small box room. So it's quite a lot of space in there for just the two of them, but I guess that's what they wanted. The building, unfortunately, doesn't exist anymore. It became a bit of a celebrity place. Not a celebrity place. Well, I guess it was. Afterwards, after the murders, loads of people would turn up to take pictures, obviously, because it's a murder location. And then one unscrupulous person, I don't know whether it was the owners of the place or whoever was renting it out, but they would charge people like a shilling to come in and have a look around. Obviously, the police had gone by that point, so it wasn't a murder location anymore, but it was still quite a grisly place to have a look around. Pat didn't know about this location prior to this. He saw an advert. It says, I've got 2 versions of this. One version says it was an advert in the Daily Telegraph. The other one said it was in Dalton's Weekly, which are 2 very different papers, but it could have been both. That was on the 4th of April. He saw the advert. He called George Muir, who was a friend of the owners. Obviously, the owners lived in London. He gave his name as Mr. Waller, Pat Waller, and on Saturday the 5th of April at 7 p.m. he arrived, lied about his job, told them he wanted to rent the place for his wife, who wrote a great deal and needed somewhere quiet. Ooh. Maybe she's like Angela Lansbury, do you know? She's always surrounded by murder. Why didn't they arrest her? She should have been arrested years ago. He wanted to ensure that it was a place of peace and quiet. So that when it went to court, there was a lot of speculation around this, that he deliberately said all these things to make sure that the place was quiet and private, and that they wouldn't be disturbed, because he needed privacy to, obviously kill her and chop up her body. There was a written contract that was signed. This was the contract where it says contract. It was really just a letter of agreement, which Jessie found in Pat's wallet, along with the left luggage ticket. It was signed J. Waller, which is obviously Pat Mahon's other alias, dated the 10th of April 1924. On Friday the 11th, Pat arrived. George showed him around the bungalow and explained how everything worked. It was also around this time that they had a housekeeper there. He said he didn't need the housekeeper there. That's fine. She turned up, cleaned up the place, ready for them to turn up. But he said, I don't need you there. We can do it all ourselves. She showed him around and then pointed out some things that he needed to know. Things that do work, things that don't work, because obviously it's a working house. And she pointed out that, there were knives and some of the meat choppers in the drawer. They were a bit blunt, so wouldn't be of much use. What else have we got? Obviously we got Pat's statements, which are quite bullshitty. I don't remember whether I read these out last time. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. One of his statements, his first statement that he said on the 2nd of May 1924, during the night, the 16th, he says the 16th, but it wasn't the 16th, it was the 15th. We quarrelled over certain things, and see how vague he is. And in the violent temper, he says violent temper, but obviously we know she's not a violent person. She threw an axe at me. It was a coal axe. It hit me a glancing blow. I then saw red. We fought and struggled. She was a very big, strong girl. She appeared to be quite mad with rage and anger. During our struggle, we overturned a chair and her head fell on the iron coal scuttle, and it appeared not more or less to stun her. This happened at about midnight. I attempted to revive her but found that she was dead. I put her body in the spare room and covered it up with a fur coat. I came up to London on the morning of the 17th of April. We know that's wrong. This was the 12th. He's not getting his dates wrong here. He was just completely lying about it. And returned to Langley that night. Langley is the Langley Bungalows in Pevensey Bay. Taking with me a knife which I had brought at a shop in Victoria Street. I also brought in the shop a small saw. When I got back to Langley, I was still so upset and worried that I could not carry out my intention to decapitate the body. I did so on Good Friday. So obviously this is the Easter weekend that Ethel Duncan is coming down. I severed the legs from the hips, the head, and left the arms on. I then put the various parts in the trunk, which I locked up. I left the trunk in the bedroom and locked the door. I didn't put this in the story as well. There's a whole big section about Emily Duncan coming in. Obviously, she was there for 3 days. She didn't smell anything, she says, because she had a cold. She said she saw some women's things around there, like women's clothes and, some of Emily's stuff in drawers and things like that. But she kind of just brushed it off, He'd already said that he was a married man, that he was going through a divorce. So she just kind of put it aside as that. The bits of the body was put in the trunk, marked EBK, as many things were, marked EBK, and put in what they called the box room. The lock on the door wasn't working, and it was, I think it was the Sunday morning, she said that she woke up, she came in, Pat was in there, and he was trying to fit a new lock onto the box room, and when she looked in, she could see the trunk. She didn't see anything else, but she said she could definitely see a trunk in there. Little did she know what was in the trunk. Pat had been down, since the day of the murder, Pat had been down to Pevensey Bay several times, wondering how he could dispose of the body. Obviously, he underestimated just how difficult this was going to be. I think it's believed that he thought it would take like a day to chop up the body and do everything he needs to do. But obviously it's hard to sever off the head, sever off the arms, sever off the legs. And then even after he'd cut the legs into halves and the torso into quarters, still at that point, you've still got a lot of work to do. What are you going to do? They don't fit into a pot. So, and also they don't burn well on fires, bodies. Well, not until they kind of got quite old and have dried out a bit. A lot of the blood is poured out. So that proved problematic to him. That's why he had to use quite a few pots. They were big pots. There were some of them were 2-gallon pots, some of them were 3-gallon pots. So what's that? They're big pots, aren't they? That's at least a good couple of litres, isn't it? So that's probably about between 5 to 10 litre pots. There's some big old cooking pots. So even with that, he was still struggling. He had pots on the stove, he had pots on the fire as well, and he was burning things in the fire, and he was having the fires on constantly just to keep to keep it burning. Obviously, this is April, so people, could kind of expect fires to be on. It wouldn't be much of a problem. He burned her feet and legs in the grate. Well, he says he burnt feet and legs. He actually burnt one of the thigh bones. He cut up her trunk as in her torso. He cut off the arms, burned portions of them. The smell was appalling. Obviously, the smell was appalling. In order to research this, I had to do lots of bizarre research for this, because obviously his descriptions were a little bit vague. So I had to do things like, what is the colour of human fat? What is the different colours of human blood? Because there is different colours, or different shades of red, really. When does blood congeal? What is the melting point of fat? I had to try and work out, because none of it's in his description, so I had to sit down and go, right, if he was boiling the body, what would you see? And obviously, it took a little while to work out, but obviously the kind of things like gristle float to the bottom, the pots would be kind of a very reddishy liquid. Even he describes it as a reddish liquid with a kind of the fat on top. But then I had to go and work out that the fat was actually kind of a yellowy brown. And what parts of a body kind of would clog up a sink and stuff like that. So there is references in Sir Bernard Spilsbury kind of descriptions that of the different things he found as well, which was really useful. And the fact that there's fat splashed up the sides of the bath and over the sides of the pots. Even SB. Sir Bernard described it as one of the most gruesome crime scenes I have ever been to. He was notoriously kind of press shy, so he never really said a lot. But even he was like, "Wow, this is a real scene and a half." Because it wasn't just like someone got stabbed and then they fell on the floor. This was dismemberment and bodies being carried from master bedroom, box room, sitting room, scullery. So there's a real kitchen as well. So there's a real mishmash of kind of places where the bodies were taken and things dripped everywhere. Disgusting. So obviously none of the portions of the body were found that he'd wrapped up and he'd put in the Gladstone bag. That's what he was carting back and forth from Eastbourne to Waterloo and Richmond. Richmond, obviously, because he lives near Kew, so Richmond is the nearest train station to there. That's what he would do on these journeys back. He would toss them out the window. It's a long journey, like to go from Eastbourne in is about an hour and a half. And quite a lot of that is kind of it's not through towns, it's like kind of through wilderness, so easy to get rid of stuff, especially if you're on a train carriage. In those days you would have had those carriages where it wasn't open plan. A lot of it was kind of, well, especially if he's using Emily's money, he could probably book a first class ticket, get a carriage to himself. He's got privacy to do whatever he needs to and just toss them out the window. Who's going to notice? So he did that. So he was travelling back and forth with the Gladstone bag, each time carrying bits of flesh wrapped in the silk, tossing them out the window. And that's why he was returning back that time. That's why he put the bag in the left luggage. He'd already tossed out the 20 pieces of flesh, and then he was going to go and return and do it all again. Oops, sorry, burpees. But quite why he was carrying the knife with him, I don't know. That's something I can't work out. Is he had the bloomers there, and he had the silk nightdress, which makes sense, because he was using it to wrap up the blood, the pieces of flesh. But why carry the knife with him? Why carry that in the bag? Why not just leave it at the house with everything else? He left the saw there. Doesn't make sense. Anyway, so one important thing that came out of this case as well was Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the Home Office pathologist, was called in to do the autopsy and to investigate the scene. It was really stormy when they got there. The weather report is accurate when I've put it on there. It's not for effect. It was a really stormy day and it's horrific, and they were really struggling. But when he turned up, he said all the police were there, and they were trawling through like human remains and ash with their bare hands, and it was just like it was like this is no way to work. no one should have to work their way, and it's not a good way to actually record a scene, especially with human remains there and things like that. And he always carried with him like a little bag, and in his bag contained everything he needed for an investigation to kind of collect evidence effectively. So it was actually this murder case that actually started kind of a real important turning point in modern policing. So Sir Bernard Spilsby from this point was like, right, I'm going to develop the murder bag, and I'll try and post a picture of it online. But basically, it's like a little suitcase, and it's something that detectives can carry around with them. So when they go up to a scene, basically, they can cordon it off. You get the policeman, you cordon it off. In there is things like bags, jars, gloves, labels, elastic bands, notepads, test tubes. Do you know, everything you kind of need in a kind of a way to effectively collect evidence, and also to label it and make sure it's all accurate and say this is where this was found and things like that. And it all seems very simple today. I'm sure we all go, well, that seems really simple. But prior to this point, people weren't doing it. They were kind of just stumbling into a murder scene and kind of bumbling their way through it. And a lot of evidence was probably lost that way. But from this point onwards, from the development of the murder bag, this is where it all started. So that came in very useful. Do I have anything else to say? I don't. Well, there we go. I think that's summed up nicely. Good, I've done that. Good, that's me done. So I'm going to toodle away now. I think I might go into town. I'm going to go into town. I've got to collect some things. I'm about 15 miles away from town now. So I'm going to go in. My post box is there, which annoyingly isn't open on Sundays. Really annoying. I can go there Monday to Saturday, but when I'm out of town, I only go into town Sundays because that's when I do my tours. But it's not open on Sundays. It's really annoying. So, yeah. So when I'm way out of town, and I have to go into town to get something, it's really annoying. Anyway, so I'm going to do that now because I've got some things to collect, and I will edit some of this in town and finish my green tea, but no cake. I've been really good. So have yourselves a good week, and I will see you all soon. Ta-ti-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta, ba-ba-ba. Signing off.